My stepmother convinced my father to sign the house over to her son, then kicked me out. I found the messages that exposed everything. My name is Emily Roberts, and I have chosen to recount every detail of the painful and shocking story of how my stepmother successfully persuaded my father to rewrite our family home into her son's name while pushing me onto the street, forcing me to unearth her hidden manipulations by stumbling across their incriminating messages. This will be a long, unfiltered narrative told from my first-person perspective. I need to articulate the full arc of events without using any parentheses or complicated formatting. I will include the background of how I grew up, how my father remarried, how my stepmother and her son settled into our lives, and how I eventually discovered her betrayal through a set of messages that spelled out her plan to claim our house for her child, leaving me with nowhere to go. In telling this story, I hope to caution others about the dangers of misplaced trust, the subtle nature of manipulation, and the importance of standing up for one's rights even when a father is involved. I was born in a quiet Midwestern town, living for the first decade of my life in a modest but cozy house that my grandfather had passed down to my father. My mother, Linda, died when I was about 4, leaving my father, James, to raise me alone. He always spoke lovingly of my mother, describing how strong and caring she had been. I never fully grasped her absence beyond the ache of losing her, but my father did everything he could to provide for me emotionally. For a long time, it was just the two of us in that old house, with my father sometimes leaning on friends or relatives for help. I adored him and felt safe, believing that nothing could tear us apart. The house itself was not lavish or large, but it had charm, with a warm living room, a sturdy wooden porch, and a sprawling backyard where I would run around with neighborhood kids. From my earliest memories, that house was my anchor, my place of comfort. When I turned 10, my father began dating again. It was hard for him to move forward after losing my mother, but he said he felt lonely and wanted me to have a maternal figure. At first, I supported him, believing it might be good for him to find happiness again. He went on a few short-lived dates, but eventually he met Victoria, who soon became my stepmother. She was about my father's age and came across as pleasant enough in the beginning. With time, my father grew attached to her. I recall how I, still a child, found her polite but somewhat distant. She had a son from a prior marriage, a boy named Logan, a few years older than me. I was around 10, Logan maybe 14. The day my father introduced me to both of them felt pivotal. Logan barely said a word, while Victoria was full of polite small talk. My father beamed with relief that they seemed nice. Over the next few years, father spent time with Victoria, eventually deciding to marry her when I was about 12. I had mixed feelings, but I craved a sense of family, so I tried to welcome them. The wedding was modest, with father refusing to do anything fancy out of respect for my mother. Victoria and Logan moved into our house, bringing their own furniture and rearranging some rooms. First, it felt like a fresh chapter. Father was happier, smiling again. Victoria said she wanted us all to be a real family. Logan, though, was aloof. He often locked himself in his room or roamed outside. He was older, uninterested in bonding with me. I tried to be friendly, but he answered in monosyllables. Father told me to be patient, that Logan needed time to adjust. My life carried on, with me going through school, trying to find my place in this new family dynamic. Victoria took over the household chores, reorganizing schedules, and sometimes I felt overshadowed. Yet I clung to the fact that father was my anchor. We still had our father-daughter evenings, though less frequently. I occasionally overheard disputes between father and Victoria about finances. She sometimes said the house was old, that we needed upgrades. Father insisted he would keep the house as it was, since it was left by his father. I started seeing that Victoria wanted more control. She occasionally hinted about how the house might be too small for all of us, but father said it was fine. My father did hold the official deed, and I recall him telling me that the house would eventually be mine, that it had been in our family for generations. Victoria, of course, knew that as well. Logan grew older, finishing high school, drifting in and out of random jobs. He sometimes complained about father not helping him enough with college or finances, though father had me to support as well. I was about 16 when I started noticing that father and Victoria's arguments grew more frequent, always about money or about how father managed the house. Victoria would say we should consider moving to a larger, newer place. Father refused, saying the house had sentimental value, that I was attached to it, and that he wanted to keep the tradition alive. I quietly eavesdropped from the hallway sometimes, uneasy about the growing tension. During my final year of high school, father fell ill. It was not life-threatening, but it made him tired more often. Victoria took advantage of that, gradually taking over more aspects of daily life. She started paying bills, making decisions about repairs, pushing father to rest while she held the reins. Logan occasionally helped, but mostly, I saw him as a slacker who just wanted easy money. Father insisted we trust Victoria to handle things. As I was busy preparing for college, father was unwell, and Logan was not reliable. So it was logical to let Victoria manage finances, right? At the time, I did not suspect any deeper plot. I finished high school, enrolled in a local community college to stay close, since father needed some care. Victoria told me that she would handle all the large decisions for the family, and that father had delegated that to her. Meanwhile, Logan had parted ways for a short time, living with friends, but then he reappeared jobless, apparently wanting father to fund his next venture. By then, father was too tired to argue, so I remember seeing father sign some checks, ignoring my quiet concerns. Victoria told me not to meddle, that father was an adult. I tried to remain polite, but I worried about the money father was spending. When I turned 19, father's health improved a bit, but he seemed worn down mentally. Victoria increasingly took the lead in all household matters. Our house was still in father's name, but I noticed new behaviors. Victoria would move father's desk items, rummage in his personal files. I once asked father if he was comfortable with that, and he said yes, that Victoria was just reorganizing. I wanted to believe it was harmless. My illusions began to crack about a year later, when I was 20, still living at home while finishing my degree. At that point, father barely read any documents, letting Victoria handle them. I tried to talk to father about whether he wanted me to be listed on any official deeds for the house. He smiled, telling me not to worry, that eventually I'd inherit it, that he just was not in a hurry to fill out any new documents. I found comfort in that. Yet I also saw that Victoria was eavesdropping on that conversation from the hallway. Around this time, Logan reemerged, proclaiming he had big plans to start a small landscaping business, but needed capital. He pressed father for more money. Father, being tired, told him to speak to Victoria. She eventually told Logan that father was strapped financially, but that they'd figure something out. I noticed them whispering, and a sense of unease crept over me. My father was the rightful owner of the house, but he was deferring to Victoria for all decisions, and Logan was urging them for resources. Meanwhile, I was busy with school, seldom present to see the daily manipulations. Father told me at dinner that he was considering writing me into the will. I responded that I thought I was always in the will. He said he had not updated it since he married Victoria, that it was messy. I shrugged, trusting him. 2 weeks later, father told me he had changed his mind, that Victoria convinced him not to rush, that it might complicate finances. My alarm bells rang. I asked father if he truly wanted to leave me uncertain, but he said I should trust Victoria's judgment for now. I remember that conversation vividly, because father looked exhausted and uninterested in fighting. I realized Victoria had more influence than I'd realized. Time marched on. I finished my associate's degree, started working part-time in a local firm, saving up for my next step. I told father that I'd remain in the house for a bit, to help him if needed. He said he'd be grateful, but I felt tension with Victoria, who often made snide remarks about me freeloading, which was absurd since this was my family's home. Logan popped in and out, claiming father owed him for a new project. The friction built. Father retreated further, letting Victoria run the show. She repeated to me that it was father's home, not mine, and that I had no right to question how finances were managed. I felt a growing sense that something was brewing behind the scenes, but father would not hear me out. One Saturday morning, I stumbled on the clue that shattered everything. I was tidying father's study with Victoria out grocery shopping, father napping. I noticed father had left his email open on the old desktop computer. That was not unusual, but I rarely snooped. However, I saw an email chain labeled house transfer. Confused, I clicked it out of curiosity. I started reading the messages. My eyes widened in shock. It was a conversation between father and a lawyer, with Victoria CC'd, referencing the transfer of the house deed. The lawyer was outlining the steps to remove father as the sole owner and place Logan as the new owner, with father retaining some nominal life estate. The messages also included notes from Victoria instructing the lawyer not to mention me in any capacity. She wrote that the property needed to be in Logan's name to ensure certain tax or business benefits, claiming father had already consented. My heart pounded as I saw the date on these emails, just a week prior. They were clearly finalizing details to rewrite the deed so that Logan would be the rightful owner. All behind my back. I read further, seeing references to how father was supposedly not going to resist, as Victoria told the lawyer father was tired of the house and wanted to help Logan set up a stable future. The lawyer requested father sign some forms. I realized that if father signed them, the house I'd grown up in, the house father had once promised me, would belong to Logan, a man who never contributed to the family. I scrolled further. I found older messages from Victoria to father, urging him to think of Logan's future, stating that I was an adult who could fend for myself, that the best use of the property was to pass it on to Logan so he could use it as collateral for his landscaping business or any other venture. Victoria also wrote that I had no rightful claim, being only father's daughter from a prior marriage, whereas Logan was part of her direct family. My blood ran cold. I was basically dismissed as a nobody in their conversations. She insisted father reassure me with vague promises while quietly proceeding with the deed transfer. She wrote that if I discovered the plan too soon, father should downplay it. The entire scheme was spelled out. She wanted me out of the house, presumably to isolate father so that Logan could use the property. The final line in one email from Victoria told father not to worry about me, that once the deed was transferred, I could be evicted if I caused trouble. Feeling outrage, I realized father was manipulated or too exhausted to object, letting Victoria handle everything. The woman I'd tried to accept as a stepmother had orchestrated this betrayal, rewriting the house away from me and into her son's name. She was essentially about to toss me out onto the street. It was worse than I'd ever feared. My father was the victim of her cunning, or maybe father truly believed Logan deserved it. I needed clarity. The immediate question was how I'd confront father about these messages. My pulse raced. I copied them onto a flash drive for proof, fearing they'd vanish if I confronted father without evidence. Then I shut off the computer. I tried to talk to father alone, but Victoria returned earlier than I expected, gave me a suspicious look. Father was dozing, so I told Victoria I wanted to discuss house matters. She feigned ignorance, claiming she did not know what I meant. I tried to remain calm, telling her I'd seen the emails. Her face turned pale. She denied everything, then accused me of snooping. I told her father once promised the house to me, that rewriting it to Logan was a betrayal. She smirked, saying father had changed his mind, that I was no real child of the household, just a leftover from father's previous marriage. My anger flared, but she pointed out father had not updated the will for me, that legally I had no claim if father decided otherwise. She said that once the deed was officially in Logan's name, I'd have to move out if father or Logan wanted me gone. Then she told me to keep my mouth shut, unless I wanted father to be even more stressed. I stormed out, nearly crying. I decided to speak to father that evening in private. Once Victoria and Logan left to run errands, I approached father in his study. He was half asleep. I gently woke him and told him we needed to talk about the house. He looked confused, so I said I'd seen messages about transferring ownership to Logan. He grew flustered, said Victoria had brought it up, that maybe it was a good arrangement. I asked him if he realized it meant I'd lose my home. Father stammered that I'd be fine, that I could find my own place. My heart clenched. This was the man who had once told me I'd always have a home here, now so casually letting Victoria push me aside. I told father that mother and grandfather would be appalled to see the house stolen from me. He muttered that times changed. Victoria had insisted that Logan needed the property more. He looked defeated. I pleaded with him to reconsider, reminding him how I grew up under this roof. He told me he was too tired to argue. My sorrow turned to anger, and I declared I would not let them do this quietly. Father asked me not to stir trouble, implying I'd only worsen his health if I opposed. I felt tears streaming, realizing Father was letting himself be controlled. I phoned my maternal aunt in another state, telling her everything. She was aghast, told me I needed legal advice. She offered me emotional support but said she had no direct power. I realized I'd need to stand up for myself. The next day, I confronted Father again, telling him I had proof of Victoria's manipulations and that I'd show him if he wanted. Father refused, calling me disrespectful for reading his emails. I told him I'd do whatever was needed to protect my future. He grew upset, saying that if I made a fuss, he'd side with Victoria to keep peace. My heartbreak soared. Meanwhile, Logan strolled around acting smug, as if he already owned the place. Victoria glared at me with a triumphant gleam. I started looking into legal recourse. But Father, as the owner, had every right to rewrite the deed as he saw fit. My father was not yet mentally incompetent, so I could not claim that. The house was his to sign away. I felt stuck. I told Father I'd fight. He asked me to move out voluntarily if I could not accept the new arrangement. It was surreal. My father was effectively giving me an ultimatum to get out or hush up. Furious, I decided I'd not go quietly. I told Father I'd show my proof to any relatives who might intervene. Father paled, telling me that I'd only cause a family rift, as if that was not already happening. I discovered Father had gone with Victoria and Logan to sign some preliminary papers. I saw them returning home, all silent. That evening, Father told me it was basically done. The house would soon be in Logan's name, though Father might retain a life estate. I demanded he cancel. He refused, saying it was final. Then Victoria told me I had 2 weeks to move out. My whole body shook in rage. She said Logan needed the space for new plans, and Father agreed that I'd best find my own place. I snapped that I'd never forgive them. Father just looked away, pained. Logan smirked, not even hiding his glee. I marched into my room, tears blazing, cursing that I'd unmasked them publicly. I posted on social media a heartfelt message describing how my stepmother was convincing my father to sign the house to her son, leaving me homeless. I wrote that I'd found incriminating messages. Some relatives reached out in shock. Some friends offered sympathy. Others said I should be careful about airing family drama. The next morning, Victoria confronted me, demanding I remove the post. I refused. She threatened to accelerate my eviction. Father avoided me all day. Logan laughed, saying I'd only humiliate myself. My heartbreak turned to defiance. I decided to gather more evidence from Father's computer, but discovered they'd changed the password, presumably suspecting I'd do just that. They were effectively locking me out. I still had the files I'd copied earlier, which I began showing to a family friend who was a retired lawyer. He told me that morally it was outrageous, but legally Father could do as he pleased with his property. The only potential angle was to prove Father was coerced or manipulated if he was not truly consenting. That would require demonstrating Father lacked free will or was a victim of undue influence. This friend suggested I keep a close watch on Father's medical records, that if Father was cognitively declining, maybe I could challenge the deed. But Father was physically tired, not incompetent. The chance of winning in court seemed slim. I confronted Father, telling him I'd pursue legal action if he truly signed it over. Father sighed, asked me to let it be. He said I'd never be on the street. He claimed I'd always find a place, but it was no longer going to be this house. I retorted that was exactly being kicked out. He apologized, said that was life. My tears returned, seeing how much Father had changed. Or maybe it was not Father who changed, but Victoria who molded him. The next day, Father and Logan left for the lawyer's office to finalize everything. I tried to stop them, but Father refused to even speak to me. I watched from the porch, thinking how I'd lost the final battle. By evening, Father and Logan returned, silent. Victoria later told me the house was now in Logan's name, with Father retaining a small life estate. She repeated that I had to move out within 2 weeks or they'd take legal steps to evict me. In desperation, I tried contacting other relatives, but many lived far away or were reluctant to get involved. My mother was gone, so I had no maternal ally except my aunt out of state, who could only offer me a room if I wanted to relocate. With no other immediate plan, I realized I'd have to comply. I began packing my belongings, tears in my eyes. Father avoided me, staying in his bedroom. Once, I cornered him to say goodbye. He looked pained, telling me he had no choice. I told him that was a lie, that he did have a choice but gave it up to Victoria. He said maybe one day I'd understand. I left him there, feeling my heartbreak physically ache. This was my father, forcing me out so my stepmother's son could claim the only home I'd ever known. On the final day, I loaded my boxes into my small car. Logan sneered, acting like I was some intruder. Victoria came to watch me leave, arms folded. Father stayed indoors, not even coming out to see me off. I stared at the old porch, remembering playing on it as a child, Mother telling me stories. I said a silent farewell, holding back sobs. Then I drove away with nowhere to go but my friend's couch. For the first few nights, I was numb with grief. In the weeks after, I posted a detailed account online, sharing the messages I'd found, outing the entire scheme. Some friends expressed outrage, promising I'd find a way to reclaim my rightful inheritance. Others shrugged that it was father's property. My aunt insisted I move to her place in another state to start fresh. I decided that might be best. I parted from my job, said goodbye to the city I'd grown up in, and drove away to a new city, bringing only the possessions I'd salvaged. Father never called or wrote. Once in a while, I'd get updates from a mutual acquaintance who said father rarely left the house, that Victoria and Logan were renovating it, probably planning to sell or borrow against it for Logan's new business. Months turned into a year. I found a new job in my aunt's city, renting a small apartment. I overcame bouts of depression. I wrote a personal blog about how I discovered the messages, how my stepmother systematically convinced father to sign away my rightful home. People reading my blog expressed sympathy and anger. I had no illusions of a legal victory, as father had the right to sign over the deed. I learned to stand on my own feet. Then I heard from a cousin that father's health was worsening again, that maybe I'd want to see him. The cousin said father might regret what he did. Torn, I debated traveling back, uncertain if they'd even let me in. I ended up writing father a letter, expressing my heartbreak and frustration. He never replied. Father passed away. I learned of it from that same cousin, not from Victoria or Logan. The funeral was held in my old hometown. I hesitated to attend, but decided I should pay final respects. Arriving at the funeral home, I felt stares from some relatives who might have read my blog or heard father's side of the story. Victoria stood by father's casket, Logan at her side. No one greeted me. I walked up to the coffin, tears in my eyes, remembering father in better days. Victoria shot me a glare. I placed a small flower, then turned to leave quietly. Logan stepped forward, telling me I had nerve showing up. I ignored him. As I reached the exit, a few relatives comforted me, whispering that I'd done nothing wrong. That was the last time I saw father, lying still, his mind long lost to the manipulations that drove me away. After father's passing, the house fully belonged to Logan. No life estate constraints. He put it on the market or used it for a loan, I do not know. I moved on, forging a new life far from that tragedy. When I reflect, the memory that stings most is that day I discovered the messages on father's computer. I recall my heart pounding, reading line after line of Victoria's instructions to the lawyer, telling him to exclude me from the documentation, to expedite the deed transfer to Logan, claiming father was fully on board. That was the pivotal moment I realized father was no longer the man I trusted. He had allowed Victoria to push me out, chosen to sign the house away to Logan, ignoring the decades of love and heritage. The betrayal cut deep, but in some sense, it freed me from illusions. I realized I had to stand on my own feet, not rely on a father who had been thoroughly manipulated or who simply no longer cared to defend my place in his life. Now time has passed. I am stable in my new city, living in a comfortable apartment I pay for myself, building a future free from stepmother's greed or father's indifference. Logan presumably carries on with his new business, financed by the property he never truly earned. The entire fiasco taught me that even family can betray you over property if a manipulative force is cunning enough. My stepmother systematically turned father's mind, forging a scenario in which the house was stolen from me, the rightful daughter, and granted to her son. All it took was father signing a few legal documents under Victoria's guidance, plus father ignoring my pleas. That is the complete story, told from my vantage point, detailing every twist from my childhood memories of mother's passing, father's remarriage, the subtle changes once Victoria arrived, the suspicious whisperings between her and Logan, and the day I found the proof in those hidden messages on father's computer. I was powerless to stop the final result, but at least I can share how it happened, so others may recognize the warning signs if they see a new spouse isolating a parent from their children, rewriting property rights behind closed doors. I remain sorrowful that father let it happen, but I no longer blame only Victoria or Logan. Father had the choice to protect me, yet he did not. My mother's memory lives in my heart, reminding me that some lines must never be crossed, that no property or inheritance can replace one's dignity. They may have forced me from the house, but they could not take away my sense of self. I survived, built a new life, and overcame the pain. This is my tale, told in its full length, an account of how my stepmother convinced my father to rewrite the deed to our family home onto her son's name, leaving me with no place to call mine, and how I found the incriminating messages that exposed it all, yet still could not stop them from finalizing the plan. I hope my words might guide anyone else facing a similar betrayal from within their own family.